Hello and welcome. My name is Steve Boland. I am a transit planner at the SFMTA, and I am the project manager for the SFMTA's 29 Sunset Improvement Project. The 29 Sunset is a busy Muni bus route. In this presentation, I'm going to tell you about some changes we're proposing to the route, and we hope to hear from you, what you think of our proposals, or if you have other ideas to improve the route. We're proposing improvements to the 29 Sunset because it is a busy route. It's also a long route, from the Presidio to the Bayview, via Partner said. For that reason, we divided this project into two phases. We're already making changes on the west side of the route. In this presentation, I'll be talking about proposals for the south side of the route, from Junipero Serra to the Bayview. The 29 Sunset Improvement Project is part of the SFMTA's Muni Forward program. Muni Forward makes what we call transit priority changes to streets, some examples of which are in this proposal, and which I will tell you about in a moment. These are relatively inexpensive ways to improve Muni service by reducing delays so trips take less time and buses and trains arrive more reliably on a regular basis. We can also make buses and trains less crowded, we can make Muni stops more comfortable, and we can make stops more accessible for people in wheelchairs or with strollers. I wanted to take just a moment to talk about the idea of a new 29R rapid route. Rapid routes like the 5R, 9R, 14R, 28R, and 38R only serve the busiest stops. They save riders a lot of time, so they're very popular. When we did initial outreach on this project, we heard a lot about the idea of a 29R. It is one of Muni's highest priorities, but it would cost money we unfortunately don't have at the moment. So it is not part of this proposal, but it is still part of our longer-term vision. As I said, the 29 Sunset is a busy route, even though it doesn't go downtown. Instead, it connects neighborhoods, including lower-income neighborhoods where more residents rely on Muni. There's also an unusually large number of schools along the route. While the 29 Sunset is a busy route, it is also one with a lot of problems. We know from our data, and we were told by riders, that buses are often bunched together, and there can be long gaps between arrivals. When this happens, buses can get overcrowded, and some riders waiting at stops may even be passed up. This project isn't our first attempt to improve the 29 Sunset. In fact, we've made lots of improvements over the last decade. In 2023, we started making improvements on the west side as part of this project, and the 29 Sunset now runs more often than ever before, every 8 or 9 minutes on weekdays when it's on schedule. While we'd been planning for a while to make improvements to the 29 Sunset, it was students who urged us to make the route a higher priority. I mentioned before that there are lots of schools along the route. This includes SF State and City College, as well as several large high schools, middle, and elementary schools. As part of outreach for phase 1 of this project, on the west side, we conducted a community survey along the entire route. We got around 450 responses. You can find complete results on our website, but just to highlight a couple of key findings, respondents put a high priority on reducing wait times, travel times, and pass-ups. And the largest number of respondents said they'd be willing to walk or roll a few minutes farther to a stop if it meant service was more reliable. Although we understand when we ask this question that how you feel about it may depend on how hard it is for you to walk or roll. As I said, we started making improvements to the western half of the 29 Sunset in 2023. Here you can see some of the improvements we made and are still making. We are making major improvements to the comfort and accessibility of stops. We also removed or moved a number of stops to reduce delays. Now, as for phase 2, on the southern half of the route, you can see here just how slow it can be on weekday afternoons when students are getting out of school. A lot of the route is on narrow neighborhood streets with lots of stops and lots of stop signs. There isn't much room here for improvements like bus-only lanes, and we can't run bigger buses due to the steep hills. On the 29 Sunset, like on many Muni routes, most riders get on and off at just a few stops. These are stops where you can transfer between transit routes, or stops by major destinations such as schools and shopping. Remaining stops, including stops in residential areas, are less busy. Before we developed the proposals I'm going to talk about, we conducted extensive community engagement. You can see here some of the outreach we did, including a bus tour with neighborhood stakeholders and 20 meetings and pop-up or tabling events like the one shown. Through this outreach, we got great feedback on the community's priorities and ideas for improving the 29 Sunset. Just like in the survey from before, we heard a lot about reliability and crowding. We heard about slow buses. We also heard that stops could be a lot better. And we heard how important it was that any proposed changes be discussed with the community. So here are our proposed changes. First, we are proposing to remove some stops. The stops proposed for removal are closer together than our standards recommend, and except in a couple of cases, removing them wouldn't result in distances between stops longer than recommended. These are stops that are less busy because they aren't used for transfers, and they aren't the closest stops to important destinations. Here you can see stops proposed for removal and stops that would remain, as well as a few stops that would be moved across the street, mostly so buses could get more green lights. Because there are so many closely spaced stops on this route, we'd be removing about 1/4 of the stops. We know from experience that while some would have to travel further to stops, everyone would benefit from more reliable buses. As I mentioned before, we would be moving some stops. We'd also be improving stops. Some bus zones, allowing buses to pull up to the sidewalk, would be added or lengthened. Some stops would get bulbs or sidewalk extensions, and some boarding islands. Both of these make it easier to get on and off, and buses aren't delayed getting back into traffic. At Ocean and Cayuga, we are working with a separate SFMTA Public Utilities Commission project, looking at closing a short stretch of Cayuga to create green space there. More outreach will be done as part of that project. We are also proposing to remove the second lane of traffic in one direction on the 2 blocks of San Bruno between Mansell and Paul. This would allow for an extension of the existing bike lanes. We'd be taking other steps to reduce delay, including priority for buses at traffic signals. And we'd be taking steps to improve pedestrian safety, such as marked crosswalks and the bulbs and islands I mentioned, which shorten street crossings. We want to add shelters at some busy stops, and we'd like to hear from you about stops that need better lighting. The SFMTA is doing a pilot project to improve lighting at stops, and we'd like to include some stops on the 29 Sunset. All of these changes would require removing a few dozen parking spaces, but this would be over a distance of about 6 miles, almost 6 miles. Here you can see a map of some of these proposals. Another option we'd like to get your feedback on is whether to move the eastbound stop at Mission Street. Right now, it's on a hill by some shops where drivers sometimes double park, but it's also past the traffic signal, which generally means fewer red lights. If it stays as is, we'd convert it to a bulb, but include loading space behind it. And of course, we want your feedback on our other proposals too. Based on what we hear, we may change our proposals before asking our board of directors to approve them. But if all goes according to schedule, we could be making improvements as soon as this winter. Thanks for watching this presentation to the end.